We have another caller.
Yeah, absolutely.
Who
Would
is going
to jump on the line with Rory?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Rory, hello.
Howdy, howdy.
Hello. How are you tonight?
I'm good. I am glad I was able to make it to talk to you guys tonight. I'd left a long old message on your hotline thinking that I was not going to be settled for the night in time to talk to you, but as luck would have it, I made it in time to call in and actually have a chat in person. So
Amazing.
That's a good thing.
Yes, for sure. We're happy to have you on. What can we talk about today with you?
I am a blind person. I have been since birth, completely blind, no vision at all. And I am ex-Christian. Started losing my faith, I guess, maybe 8 or 9 years ago. And as everything takes a while, finally decided I was done with it about 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. All that being said, growing up in small town South Dakota, actually grew up on a cattle ranch, very fundamentalist. Sex of any kind was, even dating was about marriage,
Right.
Sure, yeah.
And so, add to that, having a disability, there's no way you're getting away with anything in small town South Dakota because you have to take the bus home from school every day, a half hour, and if you don't, you have to have someone give you a ride. So there's there's no way to clandestinely do anything, if you know.
Sure.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So anyway, jumping forward then, all through my 20s, I was still very much Christian, pursuing Christian music ministry, all that kind of stuff. So only when I disabused myself of all these silly notions I had as a fundamentalist Christian did I finally actually start to have any kind of sexual experiences, whatever, which developmentally delayed me in that area significantly,
Sure.
as you can imagine.
Yeah.
Okay, so, I did not even know what the female anatomy was until I was in my 30s. I mean, a blind person can't look at porn, right? And as long as, you have to have someone who's willing, you have to, be in a relationship with somebody or whatever. So that's how that happened. But it didn't happen until, pretty late into my, into my 30s, as I mentioned.
Yeah.
Anyway, I guess getting to more of my question, or what I think might be interesting to discuss, is how might a blind person kind of be more proactive? I guess, to put it, any of the relationships that I have been in have basically kind of been serendipitous. One girl I was in a relationship with, I was in a band with her, and another one we met at a guitar convention, et cetera. And so anyway, a lot of the just casual hookup apps, Tinder, or et cetera, are completely inaccessible to blind people. I mean, you just can't use them. And plus, they're so picture-oriented anyway,
Sure.
Right.
that is really not, so I don't really even know what my casual alternative is. For something more long-term, there's the dating websites and stuff, and I'm just kind of, I guess I don't know how particular I should be in my profile. Should I be ex-Christian blind guy seeks, I kind of feel like I'm excluding a lot of people, but still there's things like she's got to be, disability friendly. She's got to be atheist friendly. She's I don't want kids. I'm very adamant about that, and kind of like, so how like, just how much of that do I just kind of like throw out there and I just don't know, I mean, it's like, I don't know how I can be more proactive, I guess, is what my question is.
Right. That's a really good question. And thank you so much for calling in, because that's by itself just a fascinating story. And congratulations for getting out of Christianity. So that's a rough journey by itself. So
well, it's even more difficult. 3 out of the 4 of my siblings, well, we're all blind, all 4 of us, but 3 of us have become atheists, one of whom went to Bible college and married a pastor. And
wow.
That has brought about several family problems, as you might expect. And, my dad doesn't want to, do Christmas with us this year, and, all that. I mean, that's a completely different topic, but,
Sure.
that's the life. That's what happens.
Yep. I feel you there.
Yeah, in terms of how to, I guess, roll these things out, which is kind of what I heard in your question is, when you're introducing yourself to somebody, when you're meeting somebody maybe through a dating website or something like that, at what point do you sort of blurt out these aspects of yourself? And I think that's a good question that we all kind of struggle with in different ways, no matter what the thing is that we're looking to share. I would point out that...
Yeah, it's like, does she find out I'm blind with the minute we meet up face to face? I walk in with a white cane, and then she's like, "Oh crap! I wasn't expecting that."
Yeah. Sure, and I think that's a valid question, and I hear all kinds of answers. And so what I would maybe even suggest to you is that I don't think you owe anybody a warning, if you will. I don't think you owe it to anybody to disabuse them of their assumptions before you meet them or even after you've met them. That being said, most people, when I talk to them about coming out as polyamorous, maybe to somebody on a first date or something along those lines, find it's useful to save everybody some time by letting them know at the gate, oftentimes in their direct profile or even just in communication after that initial match. As far as accessible, dating apps and things along those lines, it's my understanding that OkCupid in particular is incredibly accessible. They do have a phone app, but they function primarily as a dating website, I guess, if we're drawing a line between those two things. And so it works with an e-reader, and as I understand it, has been pretty well structured to be accommodating in that way. Beyond that, I mean, Kella, do you have any particular advice?
So the question of when to disclose is definitely a big thing for disabled people that are dating. If you are online dating and so they can't see that you are disabled, there's a question of when do you disclose in terms of in proximity to when you meet them. If your disability is invisible, then you do have to, as you say, come out as disabled. Otherwise, they won't know. So when to do that, I think, is a really personal question. And what you might need to do is experiment with disclosing at different points in the process and seeing what happens and seeing how you feel about it. Because some people prefer to disclose ahead of time because they don't want the in-person rejection. They don't want to have the experience of someone coming up to me and being like, "What? I didn't know you were going to be like this. This is weird." So some people want to avoid that. I know that one thing that people will do is they will not disclose until a little bit before the date, and they'll basically call a few hours ahead of time or something and say "Hey, just so you know, I'm going to be in a wheelchair when you see me, or when you see me, I'm going to be using a cane. Just a heads up that that's what's going to happen." And then that gives them an opportunity to cancel then. Rather than getting stood up or whatever. And so then you have a little bit of lead time, so they have a little bit of time to prep for it, but it's not all the way at the beginning. Other people want people to know that right away. If that is something like, I don't want to waste my time with you if you're not cool with this, or if disability is really important to you and you don't want to hide that, or that's a big part of of your life in general, like what you're going to be talking about and what you're involved in, then that might be earlier in the process. So I think my main advice is think about if you have any preferences, if you have any fears or worries about what might happen in the given part of the process, and try disclosing at different times in the process, see what happens, and see what your reaction is to it. And go off of your reaction, go off of what feels most comfortable to you and what feels like would be a sustainable thing for you to do, because you don't want to be breaking your heart over and over again.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, exactly. And, again, my, the two, like, I guess, somewhat significant relationships I've been in were people that I just, through serendipity met. One was, like I mentioned, in a band I played with, and one we met at a guitar convention that I was at. And so that, I've never really tried the, like, dating web. Well, the ones I tried, like I mentioned, were pretty inaccessible. I will have to look into the OkCupid thing and find out about that. So that's good.
Yeah, and I'd love to, I guess, just take a moment to shout that out to our audience as well. If anybody is aware of a dating website or anything along those lines that is particularly accommodating or accessible, please let us know in the comments or in the chat.
Cool. Yeah. And I guess as far as the rest of it, I'll just have to make up my own mind. It's like, I know I need somebody who's not religious,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm just over that, obviously. So non-religious, disability friendly, don't want kids. It's like I'm just eliminating like 90% of the population before I even begin here. So,
well, which is fair though, because you don't want to date 90% of the population.
Yeah, none of us do.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And so, like Kella said, it's good to experiment and try and find what kind of feels right or fits for you. And I would just encourage you to do so, knowing that, of course, you want to be kind, you want to be communicative and compassionate with the people who might be your partner, but you don't owe anybody an explanation at any stage. Mm-hmm. And so there's not a right or wrong way to do it. Ethically, I think that you're really in the clear. It's just about what feels comfortable and feels right for you.
Very good. Well, I think this was a productive conversation. I enjoyed having it with all of y'all. So.
Oh, thank you so much for calling in.
Appreciate you calling
Rory.
in. Take care.
Best of luck.
All right, take care.
Yeah, the notion of exploring the female body as a cis male who hasn't experienced sight at an advanced age. I mean, that to me is just a fascinating story, and I'd love to hear more details at some point.
Yeah, Rory, call back. Let's talk more for sure. But these conversations that we've been having kind of answered a lot of the questions that we were going to be talking about anyway.
Glad to hear it.
So it's segued super nice. So can chronically ill or disabled people also be sexually active and sexy and want that and pursue that and get that? I think the answer to that clearly is yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no question.
Yeah, I feel like that's something people don't grasp. They don't see those two things as being compatible a lot of the time.
Yeah. Culturally, we really infantilize disabled people a lot.
Yeah.
So there's very much an attitude that disabled people can't have sex, that they're physically not able to, or we see disabled people as like pure and childlike, and so we see them as like not capable of consent to disability or to sex. That being disabled means that having any kind of sexual activity with them is exploiting them. There was actually a thing that happened recently. There were a group of people with Down syndrome that put on a drag show, and this was this wonderful expression of their sexuality. It was something that they were owning, that they put together. It was called Drag Syndrome, was called the show. And whoever in charge, some old white guy, canceled the show because he didn't think that these adults with Down syndrome could actually consent to doing drag, and he thought that the show was exploiting them. And he actually said that it was as if he was protecting children, that it was essentially the same thing as if you would be protecting children, what you would do for them. So like there's really, really a lot of cultural discomfort around the idea of disabled people expressing sexuality of any kind. But it absolutely is a thing that disabled people do have sex. They do enjoy sex. They can have sex. Sometimes that sex looks different. Sometimes the physicality of it is going to be mechanically different, or the setup for it is going to be different. But it is, it's just as prevalent for disabled people as it is for able people. And, and there are also people that don't want it, just as there are with able people too.
Exactly.
Well, and there's so much hand-wringing around talking about sex in general, that the education and the information that's getting to folks with particularly neurological disabilities is there's so many barriers in the way. I briefly worked in a home with IDD adults, and we would be constantly having conversations about, how to wash your hands, how to take a shower, how to clean up after dinner. I mean, these basic tasks of daily living. But when we would be in positions to talk about sexuality, to talk about, for instance, what is appropriate to pull up on the computer at the library and things like that, just watching the staff sort of cringe and shut down and be unable to have those conversations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's very difficult to navigate that kind of thing if you have zero exposure to that, if you have, if you have unexplored ableism, that, discomfort around disabled people in general, and then adding sex into the mix, it can be really uncomfortable. It can be really unfamiliar to talk about it.
Oh yeah. And on the other end of that spectrum is like fetishism, right? Because if you deviate at all from what is considered the norm, there are going to be people who absolutely don't see you as a sexual being at all. And then there are people who will fetishize you. And this is something that happens in multiple communities. And it kind of reminds me, like back in the English Victorian era, women would paint their faces white because ill-looking women were considered to be more attractive, which is just one kind of example of that. But yeah, there's a difference between being sexually accepted as who you are and being someone's kink in a way that is not consensual or, again, kind of infantilizing in a way.
This is a topic that is less my area of expertise, but I know there's a group of people that they're called devotees, and they fetishize disabled people. And it's so complicated because, like, fetishization, being turned on by something that comes from taboo, that our turn-ons come from things that are taboo, come from things that we're not supposed to want. And so it makes perfect sense why that would happen. But it feels pretty gross when you're on the receiving end if you're hearing about that. A big part, I'm sure this isn't the case for all of them, but a big part of the turn-on for devotees is the helplessness of the disabled person, and the like, oh, you are relying on me completely for everything. You can't do anything, like you can't stop me, like all that kind of thing is part of the fetish. And like, if you look at that within the context of like BDSM or something, like you can definitely do that consensually. That's definitely possible.
Right.
But just from a surface level, if you're a disabled person and just like getting a little bit of that, it's like, well, that sounds gross. That sounds gross to me. And so that's a really delicate thing to navigate. And I'm sure for people that, that encounter partners that do fetishize disability, I'm sure it's really a complicated thing to work through, just as with any other type of marginalization that's fetishized. It's always a difficult thing to navigate.
Yeah.
And it really just comes down to putting the person first, if you are attracted to somebody specifically because they are an amputee, because they have dwarfism, because they experience these other things that look different and are appealing to you, I would argue that there's nothing wrong with that desire, even that fetishism and that specific interest. But when, in the same way, when I'm attracted to a woman, it's her personhood, that really draws me in, and that is first and foremost. And even in a one-night stand situation where it's purely sexually motivated, where there's not a lot of interest in necessarily the particulars of who somebody is, you're still acting and responding to somebody as if they're a human being, as opposed to just a woman, whatever that term means for you in that moment when you start to objectify people.
I think that one of the reasons that it's so tricky when you objectify marginalized people is that they're already dealing with a big cultural layer of being dehumanized. And so if it's the default for someone to have been taught to not consider this person as a human, and also not know that that's how they think of them, that, you know, that we don't necessarily go around thinking of disabled people as not people, you know, we don't say that to ourselves. But we do, and that is how we think about them in this sort of two-dimensional way. That when you already have that bias, when you already have that tendency to look at someone as not a full human, it's a lot harder to do something like fetishization without leaning into that bias. But you have to work a lot harder in order to combat that and to make sure that, like, you're really seeing this as a person when you don't have that experience, of culture teaching you how to do that.
Exactly. And that kind of leads into my next question, which is, again, with any group of people who are outside of the society accepted norm, representation is everything. And how we talk about these people in any context, in movies and TV shows and music and books and literature, even right now as we're having this conversation, it helps to have people who are whole three-dimensional people and not two-dimensional, props or side plots or, whatever. And I was wondering, are there any either individuals or books or movies or anything that you've come across that really kind of resonate with you as this is good representation, this is furthering a more personhood approach to this?
Honestly, I think my favorite disabled character that I've come across in media is Toph from Avatar: The Last Airbender.
Okay.
She's a young blind girl, and she does earthbending, and the way that she does earthbending, or earthbending essentially enables her to see, but it's a different type of sight, that she uses her earthbending to connect with the ground and to tell what it is that's around her. And so she can see things that other people can't. And one of the reasons that she's my favorite is that, she never gets cured. She's not interested in being cured. Mm-hmm. She loves her ability. She loves the way that she sees. And she's totally fine with the restrictions that gives her. And she's constantly making fun of other people and the way that they interact with her disability. So, like, at some point, Sokka is drawing a picture of something that they're going to show to other people. What do you think? Is this a good likeness to this person? And he shows it to Toph, and Toph says, "Looks fine to me." So Toph is really amazing, and she's also innovative. Like, she comes up with new techniques for earthbending that haven't been invented yet. So I feel like her representation of disability I really, really enjoy. Other than her, in terms of fictional characters, I can't think of a whole lot off at the top of my head. Representation of disabled people is so low. Like, it's so incredibly rare. And most of the representation is really problematic. That it's, someone gets cured before the end of the movie, or they die before the end of the movie, or they are the only positive and inspirational person that exists in order to inspire the main character so that they find strength to do whatever. Or they're the villain. That's the other one, is that that their disability has driven them to reject the world and to take revenge for the way that the world has treated them. But that's another one. Oh, okay, that actually reminds me of another representation that's good, and that is Hiccup in How to Train Your Dragon. That at the end of the first movie, he becomes disabled, he loses his leg, and also that he has this like codependent relationship with his dragon, who is essentially also disabled, and that they work together, they enable each other to move around. And that representation in particular was really meaningful to me because, spoilers if you haven't seen the movie, I guess, the villain in the second movie is also disabled, and both of them, both the villain and Hiccup, their disability was caused by a dragon. And the villain takes that and says, like, oh, you know, because a dragon made me disabled, that is why I hate dragons. That's why I want to control all dragons. That's why I want to punish them. Whereas Hiccup is like, that has nothing to do, the fact that a dragon hurt me has nothing to do with my relationship with dragons. That, you know, that was one bad dragon and that hurt me. And even then he was just like defending himself. And that I have this positive relationship with all these other dragons. And so I really liked that because it pointed out that even if you do have a mental state of this horrible thing that happened to me caused me to do this, it points out there's still a choice. There's still something, there's still a mental, you know, a mindset going into deciding to do bad things, deciding to hurt people as a result of what you do. And that's missing so much of the time when you see disabled villains, that it's always like, oh, well, of course, that's the only thing that can happen if you're that miserable all the time as you become a villain.
That's a really good point. I didn't think about that, but you're absolutely right. That is a trope, and it's not a good one.
Yeah, absolutely.
Oh my gosh.